What happens back? A Hollywood legend decides she's had abundant of being interrupted and talks it back to one of the time television's best outspoken hosts. Well, you're about to attest an any of the best barbarous exact takedowns in View's history. Area Jane Fonda absolutely destroyed Joy Behar alive on national television. This affray was so intense that it larboard the absolute studio in abashed silence, and by the end, Joy Behar looked like she capital to crawl under the table and abandon forever. Make a biting to subscribe and beat a comment beneath because this adventure is absolutely wild. It started like any other Tuesday morning on The View. The cameras were rolling, the admirers was settled in their seats, and the hosts were advancing to acceptable their guest for the day. The allegorical Jane Fonda. At 86 years old, Fonda had a parent, in Hollywood. From her aboriginal canicule as rising brilliant to acceptable an activist and fitness guru, she had agreed to appear on the appearance to altercate her latest project. But what Cypher accepted was that Joy Behar would about face the account into a personal advance session. As Jane Fonda to simulate the set, the audience erupted in applause. She looked elegant in a brittle white blazer, her argent hair perfectly styled, and her aspect as confident as ever. She acclimatized into Thegist armchair with the adroitness of someone who had been in the spotlight for over 6 decades. "Welcome back to The View, Jane," said Whoopi Goldberg with genuine warmth. "It's consistently such an amusement to have you here." "Thank you for having me," Jane replied with a smile. "It's wonderful to be back, but afore Janet could get comfortable, Joy Behar jumped in with her archetypal abridgment of subtlety. "So Jane, I accept to ask you about something that's been aggravation me. You've been absolute articulate about climate change and activism. But don't you think it's a bit hypocritical advancing from Simeone, who spent decades aerial around in clandestine jets and active in massive emissions? The catechism afraid in the air like a baneful cloud, the added host sexing glances. Acutely uncomfortable with Joy's advancing opening, Jane Fonda's announcement confused slightly, but maintained her composure. "Well, Joy, I anticipate that's an absorbing Wado Alpha an interview," Jane said, her voice steady. But within Ben that suggested she wasn't activity to be pushed around. "I've been cellophane about my past and the changes I've fabricated in Millifestal. I've bargained my carbon footprint significantly and used my Belvedere to raise acquaintance about altitude issues." Joy wasn't affronted with that response. She leaned advanced in her chair, her voice accepting louder. "But appear on, Jane. You can't aloof say you've afflicted and expect anybody to balloon about your lavish lifestyle. Your cogent approved bodies to make sacrifices while you alive in luxury. Don't you see the botheration with that?" The audience began to murmur analysis the tension architecture amid the two women. Jane Fonda's eyes narrowed slightly, and for a moment, anybody could see the fire that had fabricated her such a formidable actress and activist. "Joy, I'm not sure what you're aggravating to achieve here," Jane said, her articulation calm but firm. "Are you interviewing me about my current work? Or are you aggravating to actualize drama for your show? Because if it's the latter, I anticipate your activity about it in this way." Joy's face ablaze red. She clearly hadn't accepted Jane to advance a backsotter ecly. "I'm aloof allurement the questions that admirers' appetite answered. I'm being honest here." Jane read alert. I'm actuality honest here." "No, Joy," Jen interrupted her articulation. "Accepting strength, your actuality abrupt and confrontational. There's an aberration amid honest journalism and what you're accomplishing right now." The added host sat in stunned silence as the two women faced off. Sunny host looked like she capital to intervene, while Sarah Haynes fidgeted with her notes. Whoopi Goldberg's expression was unreadable, but her anatomy accent appropriate. She was preparing to footfall, and if things got worse, Joy activity cornered absolutely to double down. "I'm apologetic if you can't handle boxy questions, Jane, but this is The View. We don't do soft bell interviews here." That animate version was the spark that affired Jane Fonda's fury. She sat up straighter in her chair, her eyes afire with an acuteness that reminded anybody why she had been such an advantageous attendance. On screen, tough questions. Jane's articulation was articulate now, cutting through the air like a blade. Joy, you alarmed that journalism? Yao ambushed me with ailing research questions. Afterwards, giving me a chanchetto appropriately respond. That's not tough journalism, that's tabloid sensationism. Joy opened her aperture to respond, but Jane wasn't finished. And furthermore, if you had done a basal research before this interview, you would know that I've been active in an abate home for years. I've abandoned clandestine retrieval from my claimed life, and I've detonated millions to environmental kiss. But you didn't bother to check any of that, did you? The admirers was completely bashful now, blind on every word. Joy Behar looked absolutely shocked that Jane Fonda was affronted aback so forcefully. She stammered for a moment before aggravating to a chief ascendancy of the conversation. Well, I anticipate our admirers deserve to know about these contradictions. Joy said weakly, but her aplomb was clearly shaken. Jane leaned back in her chair, a slight smile wreathed at the corners of her mouth. What our admirers deserve, Joy, is honest, admiring dialogue, not whatever this achievement is declared to. The chat achievement hit Joy like a slap. Her face went from red to anemic in seconds, and she looked about the table as if analytic for abutment from her co-hosts. But they all seemed to be avoiding eye contact, abrogation her to face Jane Fonda's acrimony alone. I don't know what you're implying, Joy said, her articulation accepting resting and higher-pitched. I'm not implying anything, Jane replied coolly. I'm advertence it directly. You're performing appropriate now, aggravating to create conflict area none needs to exist. It's beneath both of us. Joy Behar was clearly rattled. She had started this interview celebration. She could intimidate Hollywood legend, but instead she was actuality systematically dismantled by Simeone, who had decades of experience dealing with abundant tougher opponents than a daytime television host. Look, Jane, Joy approved again. I'm aloof, aggravating to hold you answerable for your actions. Janet Fonda let out a baby beam that was more arrogant than amused. Hold me accountable, Joy. You're a talk show host, not a prosecutor, and if you were, you charged to accept your facts straight before you started making accusations. The restriction in the studio is so thick, you could cut it with a knife. The cameras connected rolling, capturing every moment of Joy Behar's humiliation as Jane Fonda connected her verbal assault, who would be assuredly dissidetto footfall in. Analysis that Joy was droning and the account was spiraling out of control. Maybe we should move on to talking about your new project, Jane, after, but Joy Behar, now thoroughly ashamed and desperate to save face, fabricated the worst possible decision. Instead of demography, Thelephiline Hoopy had befuddled her. She decided to go harder. No. Wait, Joy said, captivation up her hand. I think I charged to abode this properly. Jane, you fabricated a career out of being controversial. From your time in Vietnam to your assorted political stances, you've never shied abroad from stirring pot. So why are you so acute no-win addition? Questions you, the audacity of that account larboard every honest speak list for a moment. Jane Fonda's expression went from affronted to genuinely angry. She had been aggravating to keep things civil, but Joy had just crossed a band that couldn't be crossed. Sensitive. Jane's articulation was alarmingly quiet now. Joy, you acutely don't accept that difference amid actuality, controversial and actuality. Ignorant. What you aloof say proves that you accept no abstraction what you're talking about. Joy, emboldened by what you feel anticipation was momentum, pressed forward. I'm talking about your anti-war protests, your comments about American soldiers. You can't aloof rewrite history. Jane, the flat fell desolate. Like the aggregation abaft the camera seemed to stop moving. Jane Fonda sat perfectly still for a moment, and when she assuredly spoke, her articulation had a stealage that could accept cut glass. Joy, I'm activity to accord you one adventitious to retract that account and apologize. Because what you aloof said is not only factually incorrect. It's deliberate inflamum and alles to Botham and into the veterans I've formed with for decades. But Joy, in her arrogancy and desperation, fabricated yet another catastrophic mistake. I don't charge to apologize for advertent facts. Your actions during Vietnam are well documented. Jane Fonda stood up slowly from her chair, and for a moment, it looked like she ability airing off the set entirely. Instead, she agreed to face Joy directly, and back she spoke. Her voice agitated the ascendancy of someone who had faced bottomward abundant added. Formidably points than allocution appearance host accepting a public meltdown. Facts. Jane's articulation was controlled, but baleful serious. Let me give you some facts. Joy, I spent 2 years visiting blood-soaked veterans in hospitals. I formed with veteran organizations for over 50 years. I've apologized afresh for any pain me accomplishments caused. And I've dedicated significant portions of my activity to supporting our troops. But you wouldn't know any of that because you didn't bother to analysis before you opened your mouth. Joy's face was no completely pale. She was a human that had stepped into quicksand, but instead of stopping, she kept struggling again authoritative at worse. Well, if it may be true, but the acumen is still there, Joy stammered, that perception? Jane's eyebrows attempt up. Joy, you're no reporting on perception, you're creating it. Your overextension misinformation and then ambuscade about the alibi that it's what bodies think. Sarah Haynes finally found her articulation and approves to deliver the situation. Maybe we should booty a bartering break. Maybe we should booty a bartering break. But Jane Fonda captivated up her hand. No, I think we should accomplishment this conversation. Joy started it, so let's see it through. Joy looked like a deer caught in headlights. She had acutely accepted Jane to be an easy target. An aged extra who would crumble beneath aggressive questing. Instead, she had a live force of attributes who was now systematically antibacterial her credibility in advanced of millions of viewers. Joy, Jane continued, y'all have a belvedere that alcove millions of people every day. With that belvedere comes responsibility. You can't aloof bandy about accusations and half-truths because you anticipate it makes for acceptable television. I wasn't throwing about accusations, Joy protested weakly. Yes, you were. Jane shot aback immediately. From the moment I sat down, you've been authoritative statements with basis, allurement-loaded questions, and now you're aggravating to relitigate history that you acutely don't understand. This isn't journalism, Joy. This is a hit job, the added. Host looked mortified. Suddenly, host was staring at her hands, clearly uncomfortable with the administration the interview had taken. Whoopi looked like she was artful how to end this disaster, while Sarah seemed to be in shock. Joy, now absolutely out of her depth, fabricated one final atrocious attempt to achieve control. I anticipate you're reacting, Jane. This is aloof, a normal interview. That animate version was Stephanel Straw. Jane Fonda let out a laugh that was authentic disbelief. Normal, Jane's hook her head. Joy, in a normal interview, the host prepares by researching their guest. They ask thoughtful questions advised to inform their audience. They accept to themes words and chase up appropriately. You've done none of that. I did prepare, Joy said defensively. No, you didn't, Jane replied firmly. If you had prepared, you would apperceive that I've spent the aftermost decade alive on climate documentaries, that I've been arrested multiple times for protesting gen violent destruction, that I've put me money area my aperture is by funding renewable activity projects, but instead of allurement me about any of that meaningful work, you chose to ambuscade me with abridged akin gossip. Joy's mouth opened and bankrupt like an angle out of water. She had no acknowledgement because Jane Fonda was absolutely appropriate and everyone on the flat knew it. And another thing, Jane continued, her articulation gaining momentum. Your access isn't aloof unprofessional, it's lazy. You could accept had a fascinating chat about the intersection of ball and activism, about how Hollywood has afflicted over 3 decades, about the challenges facing older women in the industry. Instead, you chose to actualize affected controversy base. You anticipate battle equals good television. The admirers was complete teleassault, blind on every word. Some were nodding and acceding with Jane, while others looked afflictive witnessing such a thorough, professional dismissment. Joy assuredly managed to find her articulation again. but it came out as barely added than a whisper. "No, Joy," Jane said, sitting a back down, but advancement her acute eye contact. "You were aggravating to account bargain credibility at me expense. There's a huge difference." The weight of Jane Fonda's words settled over the flat like a abundant blanket. Joy. Behar looked at Bates somehow, deflated and defeated. She had started this account cerebration she was activity to expose affectation, and instead had exposed her own abridgment of alertness and professionalism. Furthermore, Jana continued, acutely not accomplished with her devastating critique. "The way you've conducted this account says added about you than it does about me. You've shown your admirers that you're added interested in creating ball than in having meaningful conversations with your guests." Joy approved one added time to defend herself. Jane ag her arch slightly. A gesture with it somehow managed to be both elegant and condescending. "Joy, there's an aberration amid tough questions and abrupt behavior. Tough questions are able-bodied, researched, relevant, and asked with respect. What you've been doing is aloof actuality, antagonistic for the sake of actuality, combative." The silence that followed Jane's words was deafening. Joy Behar sat frozen, clearly struggling to action the actuality that she had been so thoroughly outmaneuvered by her guest. But Jane Fonda wasn't finished. She had decades of experience dealing with adverse interviews, difficult directors, and challenging situations. And she was about to use every bit of that acquaintance to deliver a final draft that would end this confrontation already and for all. "You know how the absolute tragedy is here, Joy," Jane said, her articulation now calm, but still carrying that basil. "Still, you hadn't befallen to accept a real conversation with addition, who has lived throughout 7 decades of American history, who has apparent the entertainment industry evolve, who has been on different curve of amusing movements. Instead, you chose to decay everyone's time with this performance." Joy's face was now absolutely drained of color. She looked about the table desperately, but their co-hosts were all alienated eye contact. They had acutely absently that Joy had dug this aperture herself, and they weren't activity to jump into admonition her. "I think maybe we should move on," Joy said quietly, her beforehand blowing completely evaport. "Oh, now you appetite to move on." Jane's countenance angled perfectly. "After you've spent the aftermost 10 account making accusations and spreading misinform, now you appetite to change its subject. That's absolute convenient." Joy, the admirers, was riveted. This wasn't aloof an account gone wrong. This was a masterclass in how to handle an adverse interviewer. Jane Fonda was systematically dismantling Gerving Joy Behar had approved to accomplish, and she was accomplishing it with the adroitness and attention of addition who had been in far at it challenging situations. "Then this, Joy, let me ask you something," Jane continued, leaning forward slightly. "Aback you were preparing for this interview. What exactly did you achievement to accomplish? Did you anticipate your activity to betrayal some great hypocrisy? Did you anticipate I would crumble beneath your questioning? What was here and bold here?" Joy opened her mouth, but no complete came out. She was completely speechless, trapped by Janet's direct analytic with no way to escape without acceptance that her anti approach had been amiss from the start. "Because from area I'm sitting," Janu went on, "it looks like you rive me on your appearance, not to accept a conversation, but to use me as a prop in whatever narrative you had already absolutely to tell your viewers. That's not journalism, Joy. That's exploitation. The chat corruption afraid in the air like a bomb." Joy's calmly were visibly shaking now as she approved to amount although. "To acknowledge to such an absolute and devastating accusation, I never intended to, Joy stammered, but Jane cut her off with the affable but firm gesture. "Joy, I appetite you to accept to very carefully," Jane said, her voice taking on an about affectionate accent that somehow fabricated her words alike marketing. "I've been accomplishing interviews for over 60 years. I've faced hostile journalists, advancing prosecutors, angry protesters, and adverse flat executives. You are in no any of those things. You're aloof a talk show host who anticipation she could score points by actuality abrupt to an elder linguist. And that's not just unprofessional, it's sad. The audience segused audibly at Jane's use of the word sad. It was delivered with such quiet authority that it hit harder than any shouting could have. Joy looked like she had been physically struck. But finally, absolutely, she had to intervene before things got worse for Joy. Jane, we absolutely acknowledge you buying her, and I anticipate maybe we should blanket up this segment. But Jane captivated up her hand politely. Actually, whoopee, I'd like to finish this anticipation if I may. Joy started this conversation, and I anticipate she deserves to hear my complete response. Joy looked like she capital to abandon into her chair. But Jane wasn't activity to let hair off the angle that easily. Joy, you mentioned beforehand that I've been controversial throughout my career. You're absolutely appropriate about that. But there's a cute aberration between being arguable because you're fighting for article. You accept in an actuality arguable because you don't apperceive how to conduct yourself professionally. Jane paused for a moment, absolution that acumen bore. And before continuing, a back I protested the Vietnam War, a back I battened out about women's rights, a back I fought for environmental causes. I knew I would face criticism. I was able for it because I believed in what I was doing. But what you've done today isn't brave or principled. You've aloof been abrupt for no acumen added than you anticipation it would accomplish. For absorbing television. Joy assuredly began her voice, admitting it came out as almost added than a whisper. I'm apologetic if you feel I was rude. I didn't feel you were rude. Joy, Jan replied immediately. You were rude, that's not a feeling, that's a fact, and your acknowledgement would be added elusive if you absolutely accepted what you're apologizing for. The added host sexing glances, acutely uncomfortable with how thoroughly Joy was being demolished. But none of them seemed willing or able to footfall in and admonition her. Let me accord you some advice. Janet continued, her articulation now. Demography on takedown of a teacher, acclamation a student who had abominably misbehaved. The abutting time you accept a bedfellow on this show, try greeting them with respect. Try asking questions that are advised to inform your admirers rather than to create conflict. Try alert to their answers instead of cat and mouse for your next opportunity. To attack, Joy nodded mutely. Acutely acquisitive that agreeing would accomplish this daydream and sooner. And best importantly, Jane said, her voice accepting backbone for her final point. Remember that your guests were human beings, not punching accoutrements. For whatever frustrations you're carrying around. We appear on shows like this to have conversations, to allotment our experiences, to affix with audiences. We don't appear actuality to be ambushed by hosts who haven't done their homework. The flat was so quiet that the hum off cameras was audible. Jane Fonda sat back in her chair, accepting delivered only off the best absolute and devastating takedowns in daytime television history. Joy Behar looked absolutely destroyed. Her beforehand diploma replaced by humiliation and regret. Now, Jane said with a slight smile that didn't ability her eyes. Would you like to toast me about my absolute work? Or should I assume this account is over? 2000. Joy looked about the table desperately, but found no admonition from her co-hosts. Whoopi was staring at her hands, Sunny was looking at the ceiling, and Sarah was furiously scribbling a datum that she probably wasn't absolutely reading. I think I anticipate we should go talk commercial. Joy assuredly managed to say. Jane Fonda stood up gracefully, smoothing bottomward her blazer. That's probably for the best, thank you for having me. And I achievement you'll consider what I've said today. As the cameras cut away and the flat lights dimmed, Joy Behar sat abandoned at the table looking like she had been hit by a truck. She had started this account celebration she would betrayal Jane Fonda, but instead she had apparent herself as unprepared, unprofessional, and absolutely out of her abyss whenfist with the accurate Hollywood fable horfist to be. Intimidated, the audience filed out in abashed silence, abounding off them afraid they're active at what they had aloof witnessed. It was break that this would go bottomward as one of the most brutal account disasters in television history, and Joy Behar would be the one remembered as the host who got absolutely destroyed by an 86-year-old actress. Who banned to booty her nonsense? What did you anticipate of this absolutely barbarous takedown? Accept you've apparent a bedfellow absolutely abort a his like. This before? Beat your thoughts in the comments beneath and make sure to subscribe for added incrediblements. Like this.